Tonight, a U.S. judge blocks White House restrictions at Harvard, handing hundreds of Canadian students a break for now.
I'm still trying to process the concept of being banned from being at a school where I've made a community.
Why Donald Trump has taken aim at campus life. On a fence-mending visit, a handful of U.S. senators meet with Mark Carney.
We want to say to our Canadian friends, we still love you as much as we ever have.
The imminent cull of hundreds of ostriches.
This isn't just about our farm, it's about the future of farming across Canada.
The looming showdown on a BC farm.
From CBC News, this is The National with Erica Johnson.
Thank you for joining us. The Trump administration took aim at some of its usual suspects today. The president threatening tariffs, the White House blasting Harvard University. And in both cases, Canadians have reason to pay close attention. Canadian-made cars got a mention amidst new tariff rhetoric, but hundreds of Canadian students got a reprieve. A judge agreeing with Harvard, putting a temporary stop to the White House's attempt to ban international students from enrolling. We'll get to Trump's latest tariff threats in a moment, but let's start with that judge's decision, why Harvard is such a target and the future for those students. Cameron McIntosh starts us off.
Harvard University, the 389-year-old symbol of American higher education, is also the dream destination for high-achieving students around the world. In fact, they make up about 1/4 of its enrollment. So, when Donald Trump said they could no longer attend, Canadian students were scrambling.
From a personal perspective, it's been a very anxious time.
John Gobin is a Harvard law student.
I'm still trying to process the concept of being banned from being at a school where I've made a community, I've made friends.
Harvard's going to have to change its ways.
For now, Trump's order is on hold. Harvard securing a temporary restraining order, with the judge saying the administration's actions would cause immediate and irreparable injury. A former Harvard president is even more pointed.
It's a vendetta using all powers of the government because of a political argument with Harvard.
But not just with Harvard. The Trump administration has taken aim at several top universities, including Columbia. Among other things, weighing in on the curricula taught and on diversity initiatives used, and freezing billions in grants to pressure alignment with his policy positions. Hey, the occupation has got to go. In this recent case with Harvard, he pointed to its handling of pro-Palestinian protests, accusing it of using U.S. tax dollars to foster violence and anti-Semitism.
Sending every Israeli student out of Harvard is much more discriminatory against Israelis and is much more discriminatory against Jews.
Trump, a powerful adversary. Harvard has generations of powerful and influential alumni.
Harvard is Harvard.
Still, says Marco Avina, a Canadian Harvard PhD student in politics, Trump is sending a chilling signal to other schools.
It's a message, and it's meant to sort of destabilize academia.
Now, like many Trump policies, this will all be hashed out in court, with next year's school year hanging in the balance for thousands of international students.
So what is Harvard saying about the next school year?
Well, basically, it's telling its students to sit tight, it supports them, and it's trying to work this out through the courts. But summer is short, and time is already running out for students to make alternate plans.
And is it just Harvard affected?
For now, but the president was asked about that and was non-committal, basically saying, we're looking at a lot of things. Erica?
All right. Thanks for this, Cameron McIntosh, tonight in Winnipeg. Using his usual method of posting on social media, Donald Trump issued 2 new tariff threats, a 50% tariff on goods from Europe and a 25% tax on Apple iPhones. Anis Hederi tracks the reaction from jaded markets and weary world leaders.
Markets dropping again after Donald Trump posts about tariffs again. This time, one target is Europe, with a Morning Post saying the European Union will face a 50% tariff, and soon.
Right now, it's going on June 1st, and that's the way it is. No, they haven't treated us properly. They haven't treated our country They banded together to take advantage of us.
This comes right after U.S. and EU officials were at G7 meetings with no public hint of more tariffs.
Well, the conversation in Canada was fine. The problem is the lead up to that.
That lead up? Trade negotiations on those so-called reciprocal tariffs from April, and Trump claiming talks are going nowhere. Though Poland's trade minister saying a public statement from Trump may not translate into government action.
There's a term on Wall Street for this. It's called the taco trade, or Trump always chickens out. I think this threat actually came from a concern that the Europeans weren't sufficiently worried about the reciprocal tariff threat.
And along with Europe, Trump telling tech giant Apple, make iPhones in the USA or they'll get tariffed by 25%. The company was already moving production to India to avoid the trade war with China.
And so by trying to diversify its production base, it was hoping that it could escape more onerous tariffs. But this certainly doesn't give now Apple an exit card.
It's not even clear if Donald Trump can tariff a single company, though Apple stock has dropped since his threat, as did European markets. But otherwise, Wall Street didn't drop much. Investors may be waiting to see something more than a threat or a post. Anis Hidari, CBC News, Calgary.
Donald Trump's tariffs and threats against this country prompted a visit to Ottawa today from 5 U.S. senators. Their stated mission to help heal the rift between Canada and the U.S. But as Evan Dyer explains, the senators have words but little clout.
This was a visit to mend fences by a group of senators who said they understand how much damage has been done.
It's not like we are naive about how hard this has been, especially the border states. Every single day we feel it.
More than anything, we want to say to our Canadian friends, we still love you as much as we ever have. Vermont Senator Peter Welch spoke with feeling about a library right on the line between Vermont and Quebec that was long a symbol of a friendly, open border.
It makes us feel better and richer when we maintain those emotional ties that we've had with Canada.
But the Trump administration has barred passport-free access for Canadians. And Trump's Homeland Security Chief, Kristi Noem, used the library for a publicity stunt where she jumped back and forth across the borderline, illegally entering Canada while calling the U.S. side number 1 and the Canadian side 51.
This made us heartsick, okay? And that's emotional, it's personal.
The bipartisan delegation included Hillary Clinton's Democratic running mate, Tim Kaine of Virginia, and North Dakota Republican Kevin Cramer, who might at least have some influence with Trump.
The United States has become an adversary to the Canadian people because of the offense that so many have felt. At the same time, the real adversary for the United States and Canada, that our number one adversary, is China.
But while Cramer was calling on Canada to unite with the U.S. against China, the U.S. president in Washington was issuing fresh tariff threats against allies in the European Union.
I've been saying to everybody, they've treated us very badly over the years. It was formed in order to hurt the United States, in order to take advantage of the United States.
Nice words are not going to mend it. I don't think anything anyone would say today would cause the PM and his ministers to say, oh, we're back to the way things were. It's all water under the bridge.
At almost exactly the same time that these 5 senators were meeting the press today in Ottawa to mend fences, Donald Trump again mentioned that he wants Canadian-made cars out of the U.S. market, which would devastate the industry on this side of the border.
Evan, it suggests there was a symbolic side to this trip to Ottawa.
You definitely got the sense that these senators were sincere about their desire to restore the relationship. Certainly when they talked about the financial hit that their own states are taking from Canadian travel and consumer boycotts, they seemed sincere. But they are just 5 senators out of 100. And Trump's party, of course, controls both houses of Congress. And Donald Trump is still Donald Trump, as we saw today in the Oval Office.
Thanks for this, Evan Dyer in Ottawa.
Thanks, Erica.
Authorities in Germany say at least 17 people are injured after an assailant went on a stabbing spree. The incident happened at Hamburg Central train station. 4 victims are reportedly in critical condition. A 39-year-old woman was arrested. Officials say they think she acted alone. Ukraine and Russia have exchanged close to 400 prisoners from each side, a mix of soldiers and civilians. It's the first batch of what's expected to be the largest prisoner swap since Russia's full-scale invasion began more than 3 years ago. Once the agreed total of 1,000 prisoners from each is complete, Moscow says it will present its list of conditions for a long-term peace. There was brief witness testimony today in the sexual assault trial of 5 former World Junior hockey players, but potential evidence was front and center. In fact, the argument over some text messages is a good chance for Canadians to see the justice system in action. Katie Nicholson explains.
The accused hockey players filed into court. Their sexual assault trial mired for days in arguments about evidence. It started when Crown witness, NHL player Brett Howden, was unable to recall some specific details of what he had previously told investigators he saw in a London hotel room in June of 2018. 5 of his former World Junior teammates, Michael McLeod, Alex Fermenton, Carter Hart, Dylan Dubé, and Cal Foote, are accused of sexually assaulting a woman. They have all pleaded not guilty. One key issue: Howden's inability to recall prior accounts of Dubé allegedly slapping the woman's buttocks. The Crown wants a series of text messages from 2018 between Howden and another player entered into evidence, in which Howden wrote, "Man, when I was leaving, Duber was smacking this girl's ass so hard, like it looked like it hurt so bad."
This is a very difficult piece of evidence, in my opinion, for Mr. Dubé's counsel.
This defense lawyer isn't involved in the trial, but is keeping tabs on it.
What the Crown wants to do is take an out-of-court statement and admit it into the court record for the truth of its contents. And they're saying that they need to do that because there is necessity. The necessity being Mr. Howden's lack of recollection.
Howden broke down briefly in court Thursday, talking about how hard it was to tell his family about the events in the hotel. He also addressed his memory gaps. "For so long, I have just been trying to move on past this and forget about this all. It's hard for me to go back in that time and remember it," he said. This memory scientist says people can make themselves forget specific details.
But forgetting a central moment in an event is, if that event is important to the individual who's experiencing it, that is unlikely.
After 2 unsuccessful attempts, the Crown has made a 3rd application to get the text messages entered into evidence. Justice Maria Carasia's decision is expected Monday. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, London, Ontario.
It's been 3 weeks since 2 young children were reported missing in rural Nova Scotia. Now, one resident says Mounties have collected footage from her trail cameras, including of the days leading up to the disappearance. Kayla Hounsell has the latest.
The SD card goes into the bottom here.
Melissa Scott has 7 of these trail cameras set up around her property. This week, she says the RCMP showed up asking for footage dating back 5 days before Lily and Jack Sullivan were reported missing from their home.
I did mention to them that I was very happy to see them and glad that they were canvassing a little further and looking at trail cam footage. And they did respond saying that they probably should have been around earlier.
The children live in Lansdowne Station, an extremely rural area about 140 kilometers northeast of Halifax. As the crow flies, Scott's property is just over 5 kilometers from there. It's more than an 8-kilometer drive, but the 2 areas are also connected by train tracks.
They also asked our vehicles. We wanted to identify all of our vehicles so they could rule out local traffic.
The RCMP declined an interview and also refused to answer specific questions about what investigators are looking for on trail camera footage or why they're asking for video dating back 5 days before the kids were reported missing. The force says it isn't providing any further details right now to protect the integrity of its investigation. Police have said they got a 911 call from the children's mother and stepfather on May 2nd. They said 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack had wandered away from their home. It sparked an extensive search.
Obviously, we care deeply.
Volunteers are being offered support.
A lot of our members have kids of their own, so obviously that makes it more challenging.
Scott says she provided hours of video.
And I didn't see anything on it, but they're welcome to have it, and maybe they'll see something I didn't.
The case is captivating the province with so many questions and so few answers about what may have happened to Lily and Jack. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Pictou County, Nova Scotia.
Nearly a month after the federal election, 2 more ridings were decided today after 2 judicial recounts. Conservative Kathy Borelli picked up the Ontario Windsor-Tecumseh Lakeshore seat, winning by 4 votes. Also in the Conservative column, the Terra Nova the Peninsula's riding in Newfoundland and Labrador. Jonathan Rowe won by 12 votes. That leaves the Liberals with 169 seats, 3 short of a majority, and the Conservatives with 144. But that could change depending on what happens in Quebec's Terrebonne riding. The Bloc Québécois is asking a court there to annul the result and order a new election. A judicial recount resulted in a Liberal win by 1 vote. Environment and Climate Change Canada is warning of another active hurricane season, which starts next week on June 1st.
We can predict the level of activity. We can't necessarily predict exactly where they're going to go, if any will make landfall, and what the impacts might be.
Meteorologists expect 13 to 19 named storms. Typically, just 1 or 2 make an impact on land here in Canada. Hurricane season runs until the end of November. Many parts of the country are experiencing some pretty unusual weather. Unseasonable cold and warm temperatures have Canadians asking, what happened to spring? Jennifer Lagrassa looks at why.
From heavy rain and wind in central and eastern Canada to an intense heat wave in the prairies and balmy temperatures with sunny skies expected in the north, May has brought a mixed bag of weather for most of the country.
If it's way too windy, everyone's not going out on the river because it's dangerous.
Getting out to fish has been hard for Brian Jacques in Windsor, Ontario, Canada's southernmost city.
I was in shorts last week, so that really tricked us, that hot week we had. And then now I got my snow pants back out, especially yesterday with all the rain we were getting.
My gosh, this week, it's been warmer in Northwest Territories than it has in Toronto. I mean, come on.
Experts say central and eastern Canada are seeing an especially miserable spring, with temperatures well below normal. That's because of trapped cold air that's been pushed down from the north.
It's just been unseasonably cool and wet, cloudy, no sun. It's just a lot of misery. This is not a trend. This is a blip.
A blip that's not plant-friendly, says this garden center owner.
People are concerned about how to protect their plants. Some of the more delicate stuff needs to be covered or brought inside for these kind of lower temperature nights.
For seeds to germinate, they need temperature.
Everything from flowers to fruit or vegetable plants are sensitive to consistently high or low temperatures.
Are we going to get pollination, right? Because you need pollination to set the fruit.
Other parts of the country, like Manitoba and Saskatchewan, recently were about 15 degrees warmer than normal for this time of year, increasing the threat of wildfires. If you're wondering what this will mean for summer, experts say coast to coast to coast, it's looking warmer than usual. So be prepared to find ways to keep cool. Jennifer Lagrassa, CBC News, Windsor, Ontario.
A BC farm could soon be the scene of a standoff over the fate of hundreds of birds.
You gotta ask yourself now, am I gonna be able to sleep with myself?
The fight over the imminent ostrich cull, next. Billy Joel cancels his future concerts and reveals a new diagnosis. And imagine waking up to this in your back garden.
Okay, this is ridiculous. It's absurd.
It's a moment he won't soon forget. We're back in 2. Demonstrators have gathered at a BC ostrich farm where avian flu was detected back in December. A judge has ordered the cull of 400 birds. But as Brady Strachan shows us, that decision hasn't gone over well with the farm owners and their supporters.
With their heads poking up above the fence line, dozens of ostriches watch the dramatic scene in front of them.
And you gotta ask yourself now, am I gonna be able to sleep with myself?
Police have come to talk to the Universal Ostrich Farm's owners and their supporters about an order from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to cull these birds and the RCMP's role if the agency is met with resistance.
We do have a job to do, and we will do our job. My job is specifically to help make sure that no one gets hurt and that we talk about this stuff.
For months, the farmers on this remote rural property in the BC interior have been fighting to save their 400 ostriches. Last December, 2 of them tested positive for avian flu. Dozens of ostriches died, but hundreds survived, and the farmers believe the herd is now immune to the disease and should be exempt from the cull order.
We're very disappointed that we, again, are just being met with resistance and can't work together, because this isn't just about our farm, it's about the future of farming across Canada and the world.
In a statement, the CFIA says all avian influenza viruses have the potential to infect mammals, including humans. The agency says it has a duty to protect Canadians from the serious potential risks that avian influenza presents. After losing a court challenge to stop the cull last month, the farmers called for supporters to join them on their property and protest what they feel is a case of government overreach.
We're just hoping that if the CFA sees how much these animals mean to the community, hopefully they'll change their mind on what they want to do with the birds.
Many here once protested public health orders during the pandemic. Now they're live streaming from the farm for the world to see.
This is a battle between science and politics.
Despite growing calls to retest the ostriches, the CFIA says it will proceed with a humane depopulation on the farm, but not saying when or how that will happen. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Kelowna.
A new documentary from Sir David Attenborough takes us below the surface of the ocean.
I now understand the most important place on Earth is not on land, but at sea.
The push to protect a vital ecosystem, next. And a Canadian studying at Harvard now caught in the chaos between the university and the White House.
I don't have a plan B. Harvard is the only plan I have.
Plus, should a single judge be able to overrule a sitting president? Andrew Chang looks at both sides of the argument.
How do you stop these injunctions from being abused?
The National breaks down the stories shaping our world, next. Piano man Billy Joel has canceled all of his scheduled concerts after being diagnosed with a brain disorder. The 76-year-old singer is undergoing physical therapy and has been advised to stop performing while he recovers. Amongst the canceled shows, a Toronto date, which was planned for next spring. British filmmaker David Attenborough's new documentary opens in some Canadian theaters tomorrow. It highlights the wonders beneath the waves and the devastating consequences of overfishing. Science reporter Anand Ram got an early preview.
It has remained hidden from view until now.
This might as well be a scene from Dune. The inescapable maw of a bottom trawler, a striking shot from the latest documentary from Sir David Attenborough, Ocean.
We're seeing that the entire reef depends on all of these relationships.
Notably, the documentary is called Ocean, not Oceans, driving home an interconnectedness despite the labels on our maps.
You know, the fish don't know that. The fish go where they go. They don't need visa, actually, to move. And so this thinking of one connected ocean is crucial.
From sharks fighting over prey to crabs wearing anemone as boxing gloves, beauty and wonder pervade the film, even as it presents the beast of industrial fishing that wastes a lot of what's captured.
People's livelihoods and food and nutrition is just being discarded into the ocean.
But the film also says there's hope in so-called marine protected areas, saying they can both save vital ecosystems and help fishing.
Having marine protected areas where marine life can breed, grow, sustain themselves actually increases the catch in the surrounding areas.
However, experts warn that there aren't enough of them and any enforcement is weak.
There is this misconception that protected areas are untouched, that they're pristine, but actually, in many cases, that is not at all the case.
It's why the film is pushing for action as countries come together for the UN Ocean Conference in June. to realize what the 99-year-old Attenborough has in what will be one of his last films.
After living for nearly 100 years on this planet, I now understand the most important place on Earth is not on land, but at sea.
A chance to protect what covers most of our planet so that we can sustainably feed our future. Anand Ram, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. Harvard's defiance against Trump's influence, the fight over a foreign student's ban as government policy and academic freedom collide.
This is the latest and most extreme salvo in a campaign of intimidation.
We speak to a Canadian student caught in the chaos.
I don't have a plan B.
But first,
the courts are trying to stop me from doing the job that I was elected to do.
litigating the separation of powers as the U.S. Supreme Court weighs where the balance lies between the judiciary and the president. Today, a federal court again blocked Trump's agenda, the latest legal challenge to his administration, as the Supreme Court hears arguments that could reset the boundaries of the courts and the presidency. Andrew Chang, host of About That, breaks down the battle and the implications.
You might remember one of Trump's first acts as president. Very controversial.
President Trump signing an executive order tonight that attempts to end birthright citizenship.
Children of illegal immigrants born here would no longer receive automatic citizenship.
Since then, multiple courts have decided this is unconstitutional and have essentially blocked the policy from being implemented. But now, the case has made its way up to the Supreme Court, except the question that these justices are facing isn't specifically should all babies born in the U.S. automatically get citizenship regardless of their parents' legal status. The question is, did lower court judges overstep their authority by blocking Trump's executive order? And should they have the power to do this at all at a time when a record number of Trump's policies hang in the balance?
We're not just talking about birthright citizenship. This will apply anywhere and everywhere, including when someone of the other party is in power.
It's about whether the rule of law and the constraints on the executive, and as Justice Jackson said, whether the president can act like a king.
In the U.S., there are close to 700 federal judges spread out across the states, and any one of those judges has the power to issue what's called a nationwide injunction against a federal policy, to basically put the whole policy on pause, even if the case they're considering is only brought by a single individual. Because if that judge believes that the policy is illegal and hurts lots of people, they can say, I'm not just going to make a ruling that applies just to one individual. I'm going to make one that applies more broadly to everyone across the entire country.
So essentially, one person is stopping a policy.
And in oral arguments, it became clear pretty early that some of the more conservative justices on the Supreme Court bench were concerned that this gives those judges a lot of power.
They are dedicated and they are scholarly, and I'm not impugning their motives in any way, but sometimes they're wrong. And all Article III judges are vulnerable to an occupational disease, which is the disease of thinking that I am right and I can do whatever I want.
The broader argument here being, perhaps big constitutional issues like this should be decided by the Supreme Court, not a single solitary lower court judge. Except the counter argument is that cases can take an awful long time to make their way to the Supreme Court. So the liberal justices on the bench wanted to know, what happens in the meantime? Do we just keep applying this potentially unconstitutional law, setting aside the possibility that every day we wait for the wheels of justice to turn, people's rights are being violated?
Let's just assume you're dead wrong. How do we get to that result? Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit? Are there alternatives? How long does it take?
We're talking about, as the earliest matter of resolving this case, the summer of 2026. That's a year and 9 months, more or less. after the policy gets announced and it starts to be enforced. So do people just have to keep litigating and living in uncertainty?
And even some conservative justices seem to accept this argument.
Well, Justice Kagan asked my questions better than I could have. How do you suggest we reach this case on the merits expeditiously?
Now, the government lawyer had an answer for this. His position that it can actually be a good thing for these kinds of issues to, quote, marinate or percolate in the lower courts for a while. That's what makes for a healthy judicial system. But there is another question to consider. What if a case just never makes it to the Supreme Court at all? Here's what I mean. Consider a case like with Trump's denial of birthright citizenship, where lower courts all seem to agree that it's unconstitutional. But in each case, these are just individual wins for individual people or groups. And the federal policy itself that is repeatedly deemed illegal in each of those cases, it still applies to the other 340 million Americans out there, unless each one of them also sues the government. So the thinking goes, maybe the government is perfectly fine with losing dozens, even hundreds of individual cases, because by default, they win the hundreds of millions of other cases that were never brought before a court to begin with.
In a case in which the government is losing constantly, there's nobody else who's going to appeal, they're winning, it's up to you to decide whether to take this case to us. If I were in your shoes, there is no way I'd approach the Supreme Court with this case. So you just keep on losing in the lower courts, and what's supposed to happen to prevent that?
And this is where the Supreme Court justices started to touch on a whole new problem, which we can think of as the patchwork problem. Different outcomes for different people, depending on who wins and who loses in court, with, if the government got its way, no nationwide injunction to create one uniform result.
There are a lot of people who have no financial means or even the know-how about how to get someone to file a lawsuit out there. And people who can't afford to hire a lawyer, what happens to them?
And even if you were to try to find some kind of halfway solution, like injunctions don't apply nationally, but instead state by state, as the government lawyer proposed, you just end up with a different patchwork.
It strikes me as completely obvious that if you have two states and they have different rules for citizenship and one benefits babies and the other doesn't, that everybody moves to the state where the more favorable rule exists.
On the day after it goes into effect, this is just a very practical question how this is going to work. What do hospitals do with a newborn? What do states do with a newborn?
It just creates this monumental mess with different people bouncing around with a whole patchwork of different laws. That's what John Saar wants to call percolation and marinating, which he says is a good thing, but in reality, it creates nothing but inefficiency and confusion, which will cost the taxpayer millions to sort out down the road.
Now, at this point, you might be getting the sense that justices actually all seem to agree on this broad point, that nationwide injunctions can be pretty important tools if the stakes are high enough. But there is one question that still posed a rather large problem, and that is, are these injunctions being abused?
There is agreement among both conservative and liberal justices on the Supreme Court that perhaps nationwide injunctions are a problem, that they are perhaps a little too prevalent.
According to all the experts we spoke to, these kinds of nationwide injunctions have always been rare and only really filed under exceptional circumstances. But that's changed.
I don't think there's any dispute that they have certainly increased in the past decade.
The question is, why? Well, look at it this way. Here's the number of nationwide injunctions filed during the last 8 presidential terms. You might even remember a few of them. Under Obama, there was the injunction filed to block a requirement that employers provide insurance coverage for birth control. During Trump's first term, you saw multiple injunctions blocking his so-called Muslim travel ban. And under Biden, several injunctions related to vaccine mandates. But this is one case where the numbers themselves are the real story here. You can see pretty clearly, these injunctions became much more common in the years when Trump was president. Now, his critics will tell you, This shouldn't exactly come as a surprise because Trump is constantly trying to do things that he's not allowed to do, ruling by executive order, almost no accountability to Congress. And if you do unconstitutional things, yeah, expect to see a lot of injunctions against you.
It's simply a reflection of the very poor constitutional analysis and concern of the Trump administration.
When Trump breaks the law, he will be held accountable in court, period, full stop. We filed 22 suits in 16 weeks because that's how many times he's broken the law and violated the Constitution.
But this is, of course, just one point of view. The competing argument, the one Trump himself makes, is that this is all proof of a partisan attack, that the justice system is being weaponized against him.
But despite the tremendous success, as you've been reading, the courts are trying to stop me from doing the job that I was elected to do.
It is absolutely absurd for a district judge to try to dictate the foreign policy and national security of the United States of America.
The 40, which is incredible, 40 nationwide injunctions against President Trump's administration already, 35 of them alone were in 5 districts. That is not a random selection. That points to the judge shopping that's going on.
Yes, judge shopping might be a way to weaponize the justice system against the president if all you really need is one sympathetic judge somewhere. And that's enough to stonewall an executive order. Everyone we spoke to agreed this does appear to be happening, and it is a concern. Except it's not just one side doing it to the other. Take a look at this. During Trump's first term, 92% of nationwide injunctions were filed by Democrat-appointed judges. That is significantly higher than what we saw under the previous 2 presidents. But then, look at Biden. 100% of injunctions filed against his policies came from Republican-appointed judges.
During the Biden administration, Trump and the MAGA people and people against Biden's immigration policies all ran down to one specific judge in the Southern District of Texas in order to get their nationwide injunctions. So really, presidents of both parties kind of suffer through this problem.
So here's the question. How do you stop these injunctions from being abused if you concede that they are one of the most effective ways to keep a president, any president, in check?
I could see the court being reluctant to allow the birthright citizenship restrictions to take effect. I can also see it wanting to do something about nationwide injunctions. And yet it's a little hard to see exactly how they do both of those things at the same time.
And one last thing to consider, birthright citizenship is just one issue, one executive order. Trump has signed more than 100 others in just the last few months. The futures of some of those, too, also now hang in the balance.
Canadian students at Harvard are still worried about what could happen next as the Trump administration takes aim at their university.
It was something I never thought was going to be possible.
One student tells us what it's like being caught in the crossfire. That's next. The latest salvo in the fight between the White House and Harvard University. A federal judge temporarily halts Trump's foreign students ban, but the fate of hundreds of Canadian Harvard students hangs in the balance. Thomas Meat is a Canadian student currently enrolled in economics at Harvard University. Thomas, a judge has temporarily blocked this move to prevent Harvard from enrolling foreign students, but there's no guarantee that's going to stick. What was your reaction when you first heard about the ban?
I found out about the news just like everyone else did. I got a little buzz on my phone from the New York Times, and I was just picking my brother up from school. And when I thought, I was both like deeply frustrating, but brought on a whole wave of uncertainty for what was next, if I was going to be able to finish my senior year. And there was just a huge flurry before I got any word from the university that they were moving forward with this legal action this morning.
So you were completely caught off guard then. For you and other international students, how does this uncertainty affect your plans for next year? Do you have a plan B?
I don't have a plan B. Harvard is the only plan I have right now and heading back there in the fall is what the university and my professors and advisors have been telling me is what's going to happen. They've assured us that they see resolve coming in the near future, but we're still unsure of what that means for the summer, even just this upcoming semester. So I have friends that are set to return to campus for research in a week or start their internships at the beginning of June. And it's very unclear if they're going to be able to even begin or if they're going to be allowed back into the country.
I can imagine there is a bit of pandemonium happening right now between you, your professors. What have you heard from the campus administration since the news?
Well, throughout last semester, they were walking us through the possibility of this happening and the Department of Homeland Security revoking our visas. But it was something I never thought was going to be possible. And especially being a Canadian, you don't feel as like you're an international student in the United States as other people. But it was very sobering yesterday to find out that we are all the same. And they've been walking us through the next steps, but really there's nothing we can do on our end. So I do feel stranded in a way and sort of helpless, just waiting for the Trump administration, the courts, and the university to find a path forward for the fall, hopefully.
So you said there was some talk about this possibly happening, but as a Canadian studying in the U.S., are you surprised by this turn of events? What are your impressions of how this is playing out?
Well, it's deeply shocking. When I applied to Harvard in 2022, I never imagined something like this happening, not even in my wildest dreams. But given the Trump administration continuing to attempt to undermine institutions across the United States and higher education and Harvard being next, it's quite difficult. But I'm proud of my university for stepping up in this fight. Alan Garber and the university are really standing up for higher education and defending research and academia as a whole. And it's difficult for me personally and my friends to be caught in the crossfire of this battle, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to head back to campus.
I know this news is so fresh, but have you thought that you may not be able to go back to campus, that you might need to explore another campus?
My friends and I haven't gotten there yet, and the university is telling us that making those plans is not necessary. But if that were to happen, it would be deeply frustrating. I have research projects that are ongoing. I have my thesis research that is set up, and my life is really tied up in Cambridge and tied up in Harvard. So it would truly be a shame to see that all sort of fall apart and have to restart, relaunch, and navigate what comes next.
Well, we know you are watching this situation closely, as we are as well. Thank you for your time today. Thomas Meat is a Canadian student currently enrolled in economics at Harvard University. Up next, how's this for a view out the back window?
Okay, this is ridiculous. A ship where a ship absolutely shouldn't be.
A very, very close call in tonight's moment. It doesn't get much closer than this. A container ship run aground in Norway just steps from Johan Helberg's house. But it wasn't the ship that woke Johan and his partner up that morning. It was his neighbor frantically ringing his doorbell. What happened next is tonight's moment.
What I felt was, okay, this is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's from something like a mad movie. Is this real? But I realized that it was a ship where a ship absolutely shouldn't be. I was deep asleep, but awakened by a very insisting doorbell. He said, "Have you seen the ship?" And that was all he said. He was quite shocked actually, because he had seen it go into the beach. It was huge. It was blocking the view completely.
Johan woke me up and said I had to get up right away, look out the window. It was, I have to say, the most surreal thing I've ever seen. I went outside and the crew, some of the crew members were standing on deck. I asked them what happened, and the response I got was they didn't know. It's almost in the living room. I'm not exaggerating. It's becoming quite familiar.
you imagine? Now, police say no one was injured, and according to their initial investigation, it appears a crew member who was responsible for navigation was asleep. And so the ship was on autopilot and it missed a turn. Now, there is a silver lining. Apparently, the ship is so big, it's created a bit of a wall and it has blocked the bad weather. So Johan and his partners say they're enjoying a bit of a milder microclimate. That is looking on the bright side. Thank you for being with us. You can watch us anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Erica Johnson in Vancouver. Take care.